Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese, and I'm joined today by Greg Waddel, our gambling expert embedded deep in Big Ten country. This is the beginning of our expanded college basketball coverage with college football season winding down. Things are heating up on the hardwood, and we're going to have you covered from episodes with the three-man weave, episodes with myself, Waddell, Stuckey, as well as some content from our film guru, our America East expert, Tanner McGrath, throughout the season. Toss in some live shows on Saturday, and we're going to have a gambling text chain for you that is going to allow you to be the best gambling version of yourself all the way through the Final Four this season. So we're excited to get into it here. Greg, it is so good to see you. As soon as I see you, I'm immediately transported to sweating foul shots late in a game in the dead of winter on a Tuesday night. That's what your face means to me, which means a lot more college basketball sweats and gambling action coming in the next few months. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. You know, college football, great sport. I know you love it, Mike. I'm enjoying the expanded playoff. I think more football is a good thing. I am realizing today, though, how much I've missed conference play, college basketball. And I'm a little sad. You know, normally we pivot to conference play and it's our moment. It's not our moment. We've got like 4 more weeks of college football right now. So I'm glad you at least are here with me to give some spotlight to the sickos like me who are out here just looking for unders in the American East Conference.
You know what's interesting? Right off the bat, I want to throw this out there and gauge your take on it. College football used to have the most meaningful regular season in all of college sports, in all of American sports, really. I mean, outside of the EPL across the pond, this was the appointment regular season in all of sports. But now with the college football playoff, you see it with Ohio State. Ohio State basically, peed down their leg against Michigan. In any other season for the last 155 in college football, that would have been it for them. But instead, they're on an inside track to be the second 2-loss champion since World War II. And then on top of it, you look at how bad their loss was to that Michigan team. It could be the worst loss for a future champion by any program other than Ohio State in 2014 when they lost to a 7-6 Virginia Tech team. All of a sudden, the college football regular season's watered down. And now I'm looking over at college hoops, and I'm starting to see like the A10 race is going to be interesting. The Big 10, the Big 12, these are really deep leagues. You got mid-major leagues, you got power conference leagues that are going to be really interesting in the coming months. Which conference to you has your chiller running the hottest coming into January?
It's got to be the SEC, I'll be honest with you. And I know that's the lame answer. That's the de facto best conference maybe that we've ever seen since I've been alive in college basketball. It's ludicrous what this league is doing right now. Everybody knew that Alabama was going to be good. They were kind of the 1B, I think, on all of our radar coming into the season, along with Kansas. But while it might feel like they're a little worse than expected, it's only because teams like Auburn and Tennessee and Florida have really shocked people, or at least overachieved and hit their ceilings very, very quickly. Mark Pope's turnaround at Kentucky has been very fun to watch. There's just a lot of really great basketball teams in that league. I'm with you, though. Much like college football, one lesson I think I'm trying to take that might be a transfer portal era, NIL era thing here is that parity is real and it's probably going to have some staying power. I mean, the metrics would tell you that Auburn could be a historically great team. I'm interested in seeing what they do in the gauntlet that is the SEC. But to your point on what happened in the college football playoff, the teams that, if we had a 4-team playoff would have been playing for the national championship have already lost now. And there's no way to you can't tell me Oregon going undefeated and beating Ohio State somehow didn't deserve to be here. The reality is there is no great team in college football this season. And I think there's a good chance that when we get to March, college basketball fans will be saying the same thing once the brackets are finally clean.
So I have a few big ticket items I just want to run by you, see your thoughts on them. And I'm going to start with this. Does defense kind of matter again in college hoops? Because when I'm looking through the advanced metric sites, the Torviks, the Ken Palms, the Evan Mias of the world, you see a lot of teams popping at the top of the defensive metrics who are also deeply embedded in the AP top 10. You got Tennessee, Duke, Auburn, all projected 1 seeds. They've all demonstrated an ability to absolutely clamp down on opponents, particularly down the stretch in games when they absolutely have to get stops. But it also extends, down the seed line. A program like Marquette Shaka Smart has been a coach that has really revitalized his career in Milwaukee. It's been amazing to see what he's been able to do, particularly in those underdog spots. But this may be the best defense that he's had since coming up to Milwaukee. And I just think when I look at what they're playing at right now, depends on the metric, but just about top 10 on the defensive end. That gives them a real shot, maybe from a 3 or 4 seed, to make a deep run, potentially get to a Final Four this year. I also look at a program like Maryland. The Terps have been so difficult to defend, in terms of not getting their shots blocked, not being sloppy with the basketball. But on the defensive end, they're top 10. I think they're 8th in Ken Palm's defensive metric there. So really elevated ceilings for some of these teams, and it all starts on the defensive end. Speaking of Maryland, this is where I want to get your take as our Big Ten resident expert. The Terps have not made the second weekend of March Madness in the past 21 years. They've only done it once in the past 21 years. But they have a potentially dominant team. I know that the Big Ten is incredibly deep this year, but Jacoby Gillespie was a home run in the portal, coming in for Belmont to run this offense. Derek Queen has flashed Big Ten Player of the Year upside. You saw even in that loss to Purdue, I think he had 26 and 12 in that game. He's not slowing down. I know he was padding his stats early in the season against Tin Cans, but that game demonstrates to me his ceiling as a go-to player. This was a team that was picked to finish 10th in the preseason in the Big Ten, and they potentially could play their way into a 4 or 5 seed if things keep going in this direction. As I mentioned, top 10 in defensive efficiency. They never get their shots blocked on the offensive end. 10th in average possession length as well. So they kind of are made for those tournament games that become a lot of stoppages, a lot of half-court basketball. I know we're looking far ahead, but do you think this is a recipe for long-term success for Kevin Willard in College Park?
Yeah, I think Maryland certainly has my attention this year. I don't know if I think what they're doing this season is particularly translatable to future years. I mean, I think to your point, pick 10th preseason, that's a lot of Willard skepticism from pundits. And look, I think he's a good coach. I think he's a coach with a lower ceiling on him. I like he's always going to have competitive basketball teams, but I like this Maryland team, but it's mostly because I love Derek Queen. To your point, I mean, dare I say, Mike, a little Boogie Cousins in Derek Queen? Like, he just sort of bounces around like all these guard skills, and you can't guard it with all these plotting bigs, especially in conference play in the Big Ten. I think he's going to feast, but they really did on paper not change that much. I mean, Jameer Young out, Jacoby Gillespie in. You can argue if that's an upgrade or a downgrade, whatever. They're getting pretty much the same, maybe better shooting play from that position. But the whole difference here is Derek Queen is unbelievable. And that sort of is a nice segue into one of my happiest things about college basketball this season. This freshman class has been absurd. I mean, I know it's been hyped up all summer. I think NBA draft people knew that this class was going to be particularly good. But I feel like college basketball fans never really know, just because you're a good prospect, does that mean it's going to translate to a winning player in college basketball or even someone that's worth our attention before you end up going straight to the podium on draft night? And every freshman in this class is insane. I mean, the top 10 guys have lived up to the billing, but there are so many players ranked from 50 to 100 that have just sort of exploded. Jace Richardson's one in my state at Michigan State, where he's still treated like the 5th guard on that team, but he's shooting like 63% from the floor, 51% from 3 on the year. And there's so many case studies like him. And along with how good this freshman class is, it came with all of these international-based, quote-unquote, freshmen. And I think this is one of the first kind of segues into where this sport is headed. In this era, there's a lot of programs looking to even the playing field with programs that are spending millions and millions of dollars. And if you do have some sort of footprint overseas, you can basically just buy a proven, established veteran player. Like there's a 23-year-old that just signed with Green Bay and is going to suit up for them this week. I just saw that come across the timeline tonight. So to name a few, though, like Kasparis Yakashonis at Illinois, absurd. He's a triple-double threat every single night. Yegor Demon started the season for BYU doing the same thing. He's kind of quieted down with some injury issues. But then you've got Malawak at Duke and Tomovicic also at Illinois who are holding it down low. I'm just really impressed with what the international freshmen have done. And if I was Mick Cronin, I'd be wondering, where's my receipt on this? Because last year I tried to beat everyone to this game. All of my international freshmen stunk. And this year, every single one across the country is amazing.
Quick question. I'm not expecting you to give me an IRS forensic audit on BYU's deep pockets, but do you think the Church of Latter-day Saints is going to be able to elevate this program to being a perennial top 15, top 10 team? Because you look at the players that they have this year, what they're capable of, they certainly shocked the world to a certain degree, getting the number one recruit for the next cycle. Do you think they are here to stay? And if so, do they have the coaching and the basketball only infrastructure to really take that leap from being a regional power to being a national power?
I actually think they do. I'm full attention giving to BYU right now. It's funny going back to the Mark Pope discussions in the offseason. I think, Kentucky fans just wanted to change so much. But nationally, there were a lot of skeptics. And when Kevin Young started entering into his pockets, I think people were like, well, wait a second here. I thought nobody could recruit at BYU. No, you can recruit at BYU. You can recruit anywhere if you have the NBA relationships and the deep budgets that Kevin Young is working with now. But no, he gets to Bansa. That's obviously an exciting thing to see a player like that go to Provo or a place like Provo. It's an unorthodox fit, but I've loved watching this BYU team. I mean, Yegor Demon is kind of the story because he's a 6'9" point guard, but they still have a lot of really good college basketball players. Kevin Young is going to get really good, prestigious freshmen. That's what he wants to do. And it's not dependent on just getting the top-ranked guy, even though he might do that with how much money they've got floating around. But Cannon Catching's a guy that played overtime elite, also flipped from Purdue to BYU this summer, and he's a huge part of everything they do. I love the way they run. They shoot a bunch of threes. They play smart mathematical basketball, and they dominate the boards too. Like, for a team that is really young, they're pretty physical inside with a kind of a deep bench as well. They rotate guys in and out. So I'm in on this BYU team, and I don't think you can be out on the future if you like this year's BYU team.
Before we get into some futures talk and some plays for Friday, Saturday, and potentially Sunday as well, this wouldn't be this show without some quick rants. And a reminder to our audience, we're also going to have Stuck coming in the next episode. He is just underwater with so much college football, NFL. This time of year, he is just a glutton for punishment, doing so much for the Action Network, including that bowl tracker. I got to tip my cap to him once again. You can't bet on bowl season without Stucky doing the yeoman's work, figuring out who's in, who's out, who's focusing on the Senior Bowl, who's a last-minute scratch, all of that work that he does. It's really a 24-hour-a-day job. But we're going to have him back for the next episode between Waddel and myself. But a quick rant. We like to just get things off of our chest. We talked a lot about positivity, what there is to like, and there's so much at this point in the college basketball season. But I'm going to say, per usual, I'm pissed at AP poll voters. A 12-0 start was not good enough for Drake to make the top 25. I realize they just lost their first game of the season, a 4-point loss on the road at UIC. But wins over K-State, Vandy, they drill the Miami Hurricanes to open the season. Apparently that wasn't good enough. And, I mean, on top of it, there's some teams that are just begging not to be ranked. I mean, the Zags, what more do they have to do in terms of, underwhelming, at least from their perimeter shooting, losing games outright, losing to UCLA? This was a time, I think, to finally kick them out. Kick GU outside the top 25, put in a program like Drake. But it's not just Drake. All the mid-majors that are making noise this year, it's just, this is the cute pat on the head time of year. Oh, we have to keep Baylor in the top 25. Bullshit. You don't have to keep Baylor in the top 25. I'm going to get to them for one of my top picks this week, as a matter of fact. And then the other part of it is there's some programs out there that I think they deserve to have some dirt thrown on them. I'm going to say North Carolina, preseason number 2 in the ACC. I knew they were going to have issues in their front court, but they've just not been able to put it together. And RJ Davis has not played hero ball enough to keep the Tar Heels on track. And then Arizona early as well. Arizona, I know they weren't picked quite as highly in the Big 12, but I'm a little bit surprised that they've fallen apart as quickly as they have this season. What are some rants that you want to get off your chest before we get into some actionable plays?
First off, let me echo your point. Let's abolish the polls. Calabrese, I'm out. I'm out on poll voters. I'm out on polls themselves. I think there's no more pointless exercise in college sports right now than releasing a weekly poll half the time when games aren't even happening regularly. Like, I understand we're into the swing of the season now, but like we didn't need a new poll after Christmas week where there were 3 games played. And there was actual shifting from certain voters. Like there were people that called it out on Twitter. It's crazy that people don't take that as seriously as they should. So I'm glad you shown a spotlight on that. I want to do a very dangerous thing here. I want to complain about Dan Hurley for just a moment, and then I'm going to complain about the other guy he coached against in the national championship, because I'm mad at both of them. And these have been probably the 2 guys I've been most critical of since the offseason. I hated both of UConn and Purdue's off seasons so much. Now, Dan Hurley, I get it. You've won 2 straight championships. You can do whatever you want. You're going to get a statue in stores. I'm not denying that. But I like when UConn basketball is really good. I like watching great versions of that team. And I think the writing was very clearly on the wall with how he approached the holes on this roster when you lose a bunch of guys to the NBA in the same offseason. Obviously, you're not going to replace Donovan Clingan 1-for-1. Same thing with Steph Castle. Same thing with everybody they lost. But Terrace Reed, I watched him at Michigan. He's not a reliable big. He's inconsistent, and he's been stellar for UConn. But the problem is you should have gone out and tried to get a star and had him as a backup. I feel like Hurley in general was just floating this offseason. He's at the Billy Joel concert. He's in LA interviewing for the Lakers. I think he really, truly believed, oh, I'm so good at this, I can take anyone and get this team back to number 1. He complained that everybody had him lower than 1. I think Evan Mia had him like 8th in the offseason, and he was going at Evan on Twitter. So, look, here we are. You go 0-3 at Maui. They've righted the ship a little bit since then, although it was a stinky second half against DePaul the other night. And they probably will win the Big East. They might have success in March. I don't know. But you can't watch this UConn team without seeing some very clear holes. And it starts with the transfers. Aiden Mahaney's been a disaster. He should have spent more time in the portal. He should have taken this more seriously and not just stuck middle fingers up at everybody who doubted him, because the doubts were real. And then quickly, just to pile on, Matt Painter basically took everything that I just complained Dan Hurley did and did it times 10. Matt Painter is going the Tom Izzo route. I've affectionately called him Matt Pizzo since the summer, because he's doing the Izzo thing where he doesn't think anyone should use the portal. It's about integrity. He signed a 6th-man freshman class off the heels of finally getting Purdue over the hump to the national championship game. And guess what? You're not going to turn a 3-star into the National Player of the Year every single year. You don't need to sign 6 freshmen, 4 of whom are 3 stars or lower, in a landscape of college basketball where you can get immediate talent. There are so many people out there that would have ran through a wall to play the Lance Jones role for Purdue after what happened to Lance Jones in their run last season. Mason Gillis, he's at Duke. He's happy right now. They need veteran presences on the defensive side of the ball so badly. Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman, Wren have been stellar, and it doesn't even matter. As we record this, Mike, I look up, they're down 1 point to lowly Minnesota right now, and they changed their starting lineup for the 7th time this season. Matt Painter, shame on you. Let's fix this next offseason.
I mean, I like to also heap some negativity on Hurley when he just loses his mind, but in a way that doesn't seem to inspire the team. And it also kind of directs me back to last season. He had that same fire, but I felt like it translated on the court specifically through Cam Spencer, who would play hard, who would be a nuisance. You saw it in the NBA the other night. He's ripping the ball away from Devin Booker. He's got that dog in him. He doesn't care. He didn't care, doing the dirty work and being the glue guy for UConn, and at times being the star player who needed to put in, points in the bucket. I just view this as a coach who needs to be humbled a little bit. Maybe the early season, maybe that offer in Maui is what the doctor ordered, but you also look at some of their underlying metrics, barely inside the top 100 on the defensive end. I think that's certainly going to nip them, a program that usually has a January swoon to begin with. We'll see if they're able to string together a long winning streak in conference play with a defense that, they potentially could lose in games in the 70s and 80s to 3 or 4 teams out of the Big East. So we'll see how that translates. All right, let's get into some actionable plays. I promised it. Let's talk futures. When Stuck comes back for the next episode, we're going to do our futures roundtable where we vote on what to add to the official portfolio. But this is a free roll here. We're just going to take both of them. I'm going to start with a guy who was a late scratch tonight. Did not make me all that happy, taking Rutgers plus 5.5. Instead, I think it floated up to plus 8 once the news of Dylan Harper not being available for the Scarlet Knights. I still think he's got value at 60-1 to win the Wooden. I know that Janai Broom is the prohibitive favorite right now, but there's a lot of basketball to be played. You saw him already leave a game with an injury. He's going to play in a very rugged SEC, going to play a lot of high-profile games with teams focused on him. So I think what that has done is it has inflated the odds on some of these other contenders. And let's talk obvious hurdles really quick. 60-1 is a long shot, and it's a long shot for a reason. Combo guards, point guards, they haven't won this thing since Jalen Brunson in 2018. The winner has also come from a March Madness 1, 2, or 3 seed every single time in the past decade. Rutgers right now, you look at bracket matrix, they're nowhere to be found. They certainly have to play better team basketball, not just have these moral victories. They need to start stacking victories. I would say they absolutely have to get, let's call it a top 8 seed for him to have any chance to win this thing. But on the pros side of this argument, there's a lot to like. He's a consensus top 3 draft pick in the NBA draft. When you look at all the different sites, the aggregators, he's someone who's moved his way all the way up to the rearview mirror of Cooper Flagg. He'll challenge Phil Sellers, who played in the mid-70s for Rutgers, the last team to go undefeated. I believe they lost in the Final Four with an undefeated record, as the greatest Rutgers basketball player of all time. That's the ceiling for Harper, in my opinion, because of everything that he's done on the court. The advanced stats community loves this guy. Evan Mia loves him. He takes games over, evidenced by 8 game MVPs, according to KenPom, which is tied for second most game MVPs on the season, tied with players like Janai Broom and Eric Dixon. So on top of everything else, there's just the style factor. You talked about this deep freshman class. He is appointment television. When he goes off and he puts that whole team on his back, he can score 35 or 40 points. That's a quick way for 2 upset wins in 1 week to go from 60-1 to 20-1, to really move yourself into that conversation. I still think there's value on him right now. I understand that there's pitfalls, but when you're putting together a portfolio, I'd like to have some long shots in there. What do you think about Harper as someone who could become an AP first team All-American?
Well, it's fantastic value for sure. He is the second best player in college basketball. And that pisses a lot of people off when you say it out loud. But I think he's been better than Cooper Flagg this season, at least offensively, right? We know Coop's sensational on both ends. But Dylan Harper is as polished of a freshman guard as I have seen in a decade. And I know they got a little bit of noise in the MTE Thanksgiving week. I forget what the players era, right? Every game's coming down to the wire. He's had a buzzer beater already this season. He's one of the clutchest players in the country, and that showed through in his high school tape as well. He had a bunch of game winners on the prep scene. But I think my issue with it, it's worth a bet right now. And honestly, you talked about odd timing. Maybe he misses a game. Maybe he's immediately back. I heard this is just an illness in Bloomington. Umar Ballo a couple days ago had an illness in Bloomington. That's interesting too. But I do think if he misses a game, maybe this gets juiced up a little more. He really just needs to get this team to the tournament. And they're definitely on the outside looking in. But if we see a miraculous February here, it's not out of the question. And I think you could argue getting Rutgers to the NCAA tournament is as big of an accomplishment as anything that Janai Broom or Cooper Flagg could do this season.
All right, what is your future you're bringing to the table here?
All right, so I'm going to go back to the SEC. I mentioned it. It's where my heart has been, my eyes have been this season, just because the basketball has been so incredible. And I'm going to go back to the team that we all loved in the offseason, and I'm going to buy some Alabama stock. They are 5-1 to win the SEC right now. That reflects where all of the analytics sites have them. 4th in this league, behind Auburn, behind Tennessee, behind Florida, but 9th nationally. I mean, they're just a few spots behind all those teams. Auburn's really the only team that's created any separation. But when you look at Alabama, what has gone wrong? I mentioned it briefly. I don't know that it is anything going wrong as much as some of these other teams peaking very, very early in their non-conference schedules. I mean, credit to Florida and what they've done. They're not going to go undefeated forever. I think it's a good time to sell high on the Gators. Auburn is definitely for real. I like Tennessee as well. But by the end of last season, we all would have taken Alabama over Tennessee, I think, or at least it was close. And right now, I think this is a really good buy low opportunity. Let me give you a calendar-based schedule note here. Now is the time to jump on Alabama if you are looking to do it, because the gauntlet that everyone has to play, all these top 4 teams in the SEC are going to have to get through each other multiple times. Alabama's games are backloaded against those 4 teams. They played just one game against Florida, Auburn, or Tennessee until March. That's it. Every other team in that group that I just mentioned plays 3 until March. You're basically getting 2 less really, really tough games. And if you get to March and Alabama is tied or 1 game up, you're going to have some hedge opportunities. You'll know who's fallen out of the race. I think it's a good time to jump on Alabama. And honestly, gun to my head, this is still the team that I truly think wins the SEC. I love what Auburn's done, but they play such a psychotic brand of basketball. There's going to be some highs and some lows with that team. Alabama's shot formula is what it always has been. They have better bigs than they've had the last couple of years. They still have Mark Sears, who's starting to make shots. I'm buying this team 5-1 to win the SEC.
I am so close to buying at this exact moment, but I'm glad that you brought up the schedule, because I think there's a hidden loss coming up in the next 5, and hopefully it's early in this 5-game stretch. So if this number can get closer to 7, probably plus 650, I'm pulling the trigger. They get Oklahoma on Saturday, but the game that I kind of circled at South Carolina on January 8th, I feel like that could be a landmine game for them if they shoot 30% from 3 in that game instead of 40%. All of a sudden, South Carolina hangs around a little bit. They have some bouncy athletic guys in their front court. If they were to lose a game like that, I think a little bit of market panic could hit. And then if that number, as I said, slides closer to 7-1, I'm with you, because that psychotic brand of basketball, when it's working, we saw it in the runs of the Final Four. I mean, they can beat anybody. I don't think there's a difficult path to envision for them beating Auburn in a head-to-head, beating Tennessee. These are teams that can fall if Bama plays, the way they want to play their basketball. So I'm with you on this. The number's not quite there for me, but we're close. So I like that. I'm glad that we can add both of these at this point in the podcast, and Stuck's just going to have to live with it. He can talk through it when he comes to the next episode. All right, let's hop into some actionable stuff for the weekend. I'm going to get started on Friday. Going to go deep in the low major basketball card. Let's talk Merrimack laying 9.5 against Fairfield. The Warriors have the best playmaking guard and point guard in the MAC. You can make an argument that he's the best point guard in all of low major basketball. He's so smooth with it. He's got incredible mid-range game, which is so rare in modern basketball. He's lethal in that 15-foot pull-up game. He takes everybody off the dribble. The pride of West Catholic in Philly. Grew up about a mile and a half from where I grew up. Talking about Bud Clark here. He's 5'10". Let's be honest. He's probably 5'8". If he was 3 inches taller, he'd be playing at Nova or St. John's or some power program in the Northeast. But instead, the Warriors get him, and Evan Mia rates him in terms of a playmaker as an A-plus playmaker. And that tracks with his stats 25-4 on 35% shooting from 3. He's absolutely nails from the line. He knows how to draw contact. He gave Stanford 32 points and 6 assists. So this is somebody who can elevate his play when they play against top teams. Now, both teams are 5-8, and this is why it's a good opportunity to lay the number with Merrimack here, because they lost paycheck games, St. Mary's, Stanford, Rutgers. They hung with all 3. They lost by 5, 6, and 11, respectively. They covered all 3 games easily. They also tested themselves in the non-conference against mid-major competition like VCU and Princeton. Merrimack's strength of schedule, 60th. Fairfield's 277th. So I think this is a game you have to absolutely pull the trigger on. Any number south of 11. I'm going to go ahead and fade a Stags offense that's buried in the 300s in nearly every shooting metric and leaves more shooters wide open than basically any team in the entire country. I think Bud Clark is going to eat in this game. If there was a player prop market, there's not going to be. I would go over on everything up to 30 points for him. I think he's going to cook in this one. And I think he's got the inside track to be the MAC player of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and take a good number, anything below 11.
Calabrese, we're so back, by the way. The first pick of the year, Merrimack, minus 9.5. I love it, my friend.
All right, what do you got? Hit me with your first pick.
All right, I'm going to turn our attention to the Big 12 here. I've got a Saturday game for us, and I'm looking at Houston against BYU. Now, it's a home game for Houston. That's obviously a dangerous spot. BYU, we talked about them earlier in the show. I am a believer of this team. And more importantly, I think this is a good time to jump back in on BYU because, as I've alluded to, Yegor Demon has been in and out of the lineup. Now, when healthy at the beginning of the season, he was absolutely sensational. His debut, he had 18 points, 11 assists, 4 rebounds. He truly is, I don't know who to even compare him to. He's a 6'10 point guard. He's dunking on people, hitting step-back threes. He can do it all. And all these other shooters play so well off of him that when he's full go, it really unlocks them and makes them impossible to guard. Now, Houston's physical. We know what the Houston defense is. It's number 1 on KenPom like it always is. But this has not been the same Houston team that they've been for the last 4 seasons. And I think everyone's afraid to say that out loud. But they're through the first 2 months of the year. They don't have a win over a top 75 opponent on KenPom. Now, they haven't had a bunch of opportunities, but it hasn't been pretty when they have. They've gotten into, games where they could pull away in the second half, and that offense just goes cold. The defense won't go away, but I don't trust a team that's centered around LJ Cryer to close games and create separation. KenPom has this as an 11-point spread. I would guess that we're going to get close to double digits here, if not more. If it's at 10 or higher, I'm all over BYU. I think this will be a competitive game. They are an elite rebounding team. They're the number 1 team in the country at preventing second chances. That's not what Houston wants to see in their first game in conference play. I'll take the points with BYU.
Let's stick on Saturday and also stick in the Big 12. I'm going to go with Coach Ott's laying 8.5. I'd probably lay this up to 9.5 with Iowa State at home against Baylor. Let's take a look at Baylor's rap sheet recently. Since November 22nd, they get dog walked by Tennessee, lose by 15. They get closed out by UConn late after, I think they were tied with 5 minutes to go. They lose that by 2 possessions. Then they're stacking wins against New Orleans, Abilene Christian, Norfolk State, something called Arlington Baptist, and then a win against Utah. I just said that I want to be pissed off, and I am pissed off at the AP voters for putting them in the top 25. Color me unimpressed with what they've done really in the last 6 weeks. Meanwhile, Iowa State, this is a team I've been critical of because they clearly had the defense in the past few seasons to make a deep run, possibly get to a Final Four, but the offense wasn't there. It's been the running joke that I've been too hard on Lipsy. Well, this defense has been at a national title level again this year, but when they get into those key moments, they're avoiding those deep freezes offensively. And really, I think there's just not enough national attention on how much better they've been offensively this season. When you look at what they have from a firepower perspective, I think they finally are going to get over the hump, and it's not just going to be in March. I think it's going to be going on the warpath in the Big 12. They're 11th in shooting percentage in the entire country. Their only loss was a 15-round battle with Auburn in Maui. They're beating really good teams by double digits, like Marquette by 11 at home. They go to Colorado. That's a hard place to win by double digits. They do it. They cover a number against the Buffs there, their second win against Colorado on the season. And then when you get into their rotation and what they bring to the table, they go 6 deep with their rotation of players all averaging in double figures. Gilbert as their starting shooting guard and Jones off the bench as a tandem. Sometimes they're on the floor together. Most of the time, Jones is coming in to give him a breather. They're averaging 33 points per game, and they're playing great team basketball without relying on the 3-point shot. And this point is why I think Baylor could get boat raced in this game, because when you look at Baylor's defense, their bugaboo the whole year has been defending the 3-point line, rotating, making sure they're not leaving shooters open. If Iowa State makes 8 or 9 threes in this game, with how efficient they've been inside of the arc and how well they've shared the basketball and doing a phenomenal job not turning it over, I am not afraid laying a single-digit number in this one. Finally, Iowa State tied for 3rd nationally in turnover margin. This is still a Baylor team that I have questions about how everything's gelling together. Who is the alpha in their offensive sets? I think that is going to be tested against an Iowa State team that plays ferocious defense, on-ball defense at home. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this all the way up to 9.5. I know it seems like a big number when it's a ranked matchup, but I think Baylor is fool's gold, and I think Iowa State is a true national contender.
There's a lot of fools that will be fooled because they're begging people to take Baylor up at 9.5, and I think you're on the right side of this, Calabrese. All right, I'll give one more for the weekend. I've got my eyes on Lincoln, Nebraska. You see the Cornhuskers quarter zip if you're watching this. Pinnacle Bank Arena. Nobody walks into Pinnacle Bank Arena at 2 p.m. Eastern on a Saturday in January and comes away unscathed. This is one of my favorite matchup-based bets. One of my favorite spot bets of the season. I know I'm saying that early in conference play, but I absolutely adore this. UCLA's foray into Big Ten play, their first trip east, comes to Lincoln this weekend. They're going to Michigan, they're back West Coast. They've got Michigan Tuesday, but this is back and forth. This is the first big back and forth that they have this year. This UCLA team is very good, as evidenced by their win over Gonzaga, as evidenced by going into Oregon and getting a win there, as evidenced by a close win over Arizona. All three of those games came down to the final possession. They were a one-score basketball game. It's an elite defense, and it's an offense that, quite frankly, doesn't know what it wants to do other than get the ball to Tyler Bilodeau and let him cook. That's a horrible recipe against Nebraska. This Fred Hoiberg defense is unorthodox. They take away shots at the rim. They will literally just eliminate post scorers from an entire game. My favorite performance from anyone in college basketball this season was not any player's offense. It was when Nebraska had held Ryan Kalkbrenner to 0 shot attempts inside the arc. It's just dastardly what they do. If UCLA is going to try and do what they normally do in this game, they will get destroyed because Nebraska begs you to shoot threes. They are 356th in the country at preventing three-point attempts. UCLA won't shoot them. That's not what they want to do. They want to get to the rim. I think they're going to be very stubborn, as Mick Cronin teams tend to be here. I think they're going to try and force feed Bilodeau. And I think just the fact that this is a welcome to Big Ten play come east against a Nebraska team that is always tougher than they look at the surface at home. They haven't lost a game at home this season. They smoked Indiana at home earlier this season. I like the Cornhuskers here. I don't know what this will be. KenPom has Nebraska by 1 as a favorite. My guess would be it may get up to Nebraska -2, -3 even. I'll lay it up to -5. I think this team wins by double digits.
It's like we've been running the two-man weave for the entire season here because I started with the defensive teams making some noise this year in college basketball, and we end with your play on the Cornhuskers, who were up to, I believe, 10th or 11th in KenPom's defensive metric. And I just love the inside the X's and O's game where they're going to challenge UCLA to beat them from the perimeter. If they do, great. They don't want to do it. That's not the brand of basketball they want to play. So I love what you're laying down there, Greg. All right, that's it for us here on the Big Bets on Campus podcast. As I mentioned, next time you see our lovely faces, Stuck will be driving the ship and we will be facilitating for him. Can't wait to get into Futures Roundtable, talks about, really about everything that's burning on the positive and negative side of college hoops. We also have the 3-man weave on a weekly basis. Tanner McGrath is going to contribute this season as well. And then very soon we'll have those live Saturday shows back up and running, and we'll get into full Saturday cards once bowl season comes down just a little bit. We're so close, but at this point, just so happy to be back talking college hoops. I appreciate everyone for listening in. A reminder, if you hit us up with those 5-star reviews, I'm going to start giving out some $10 flyers on our futures. So go ahead, hit us with a 5-star review, say whatever you want, and then I will go ahead and pick one out. I'll DM you on social media, and we'll start to maybe get some group wins here. I think that's what we need for the pod. We did a little of that on the Group of 5 deep dive this season as well. So we're excited to bring it here to the college hoops lovers in your life. All right, that's it for us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.